we're going to talk about boundaries.
Boundaries, yes. So I love this conversation. I mean, especially even about just what just happened. Like there is that feeling inside right now of like, oh, that's feeling like really difficult and challenging. But it's like finding that place of where can we respect our boundaries and be honest to ourselves at the same time. And it's especially in relating. I think in relating, there's always that feeling of like wanting to make our partner happy and doing things that sometimes we wouldn't necessarily do, but we still want to do because we recognize the value and how that can, appreciate inside of it. So I think it's a very valid conversation, and it's a lot of things that people in relating often go through. So what does that mean for you? Like, how do you find out a space where you can still stay in integrity in who you are, but without losing the validity and strength of your being?
Well, I think that core to boundaries is really feeling into and attuning to your body when someone asks you to do something for a start. So am I saying yes because I'm caretaking and because I'm wanting to please? Or am I saying a full yes from all of my body as well as my mind that wants to please? And I think it's very automatic for some people to make somebody else's yes more important than their no. So the first step to boundaries is a lot of people wouldn't even need to set a boundary if in the first place, when they were asked to do something, then they just really tuned in and felt if they were a yes or if they were a no instead of going into an automatic response.
Hmm. So it's really around the yeses and nos. And yeah, it's funny being here in India, and often the common culture with things is they say yes to everything. Like we're filming this course here this week, and guys are saying yes to things that they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, but it's such an ingrained part of their communication. It's like, oh, yes, yes, yes. And that's like wanting to please and wanting to make someone happy and wanting to do that. And I feel like the representation of that happens inside of the area of relating is not having a solid core, not having a solid, like, this is what feels good for me, this is where I can move from. And then once that core is there, there's more space to like flow from. But without the core there, it's like the area is much more confusing. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think there's a lot of talk about boundaries and boundary setting, and a lot of the time what gets confused is that the distinction between boundaries and barriers,
Hmm.
and between making someone responsible for our boundaries or us being responsible for our boundaries. So my journey with boundaries has been that I absolutely had none. And then I started finding them, but as I was finding them, I would be asking something of the person. So I would be saying, my boundary is that you need to speak kindly, or my boundary is that you can't do this, or that you need to do that. And what I've learned is that if you give a boundary that's dependent on someone, you're still a puppet on strings. And people can just not do that. I mean, a real boundary is dependent on you, not the other person. That's
Yeah.
the first thing that I've learned. And the second thing is that when you set a boundary, you can't simultaneously look after someone else's emotional body. I mean, often the reason you're setting the boundary in the first place is because that person's energy is imposing. And if a person's energy is imposing in some way, then usually they're triggered, or they're in their unconscious, or they're in their desire, and they don't have the rationality full on. So if you set a boundary at that point, then they're probably going to go into reaction. So
Yeah.
so on that first point, which is around your boundary not depending on someone else, what that means is boundaries are embodied. It's like sometimes you need to walk away, or you need to just say no as a complete sentence. That's a boundary. So many times it's like, no, because of this and this and this, and then the person has an answer. It's just like, no, or I won't allow you to do that, or I'm not having this conversation anymore. And it's in the I. So this was a huge wake up call for me. Yeah. And then the second thing is that space of caretaking. It's like people who benefited from me not having boundaries really weren't happy with me suddenly having boundaries, and then would attack me, negate me, or shame me, or come up with something that kept the conversation going. And then I was getting really confused and like, oh, this isn't working. And then I would end up caretaking. But once I realized that the boundary is up to me and that my boundary is my own energetic limits and this is where I end and they begin, then it's like whatever they are moving through as a result of me feeling my boundaries in my body and moving with those boundaries and listening to my body, then that's up to them and that's their soul's journey, and it's not up to me to be arrogant enough that I think I have control over that.
Yeah. And there's one thing I really want to bring to focus in what you're sharing is really the attunement to the emotional body. And I feel like to really have healthy boundaries inside of relating, inside of business, inside of romantic relating, it's this place where the individual has to actually feel like responsible for their own emotional body. Because I often hear these conversations of boundaries, well, you made me upset, so now I'm going to put a boundary. It's like, well, but beyond that, I'm upset because, like, the individual first has to own where the upset is arising from, and then if that continues to show up in that way, okay, I need to create some boundaries, and that is such a fundamental, like, tactful attunement that's very much lost in the space of relating, because people are just in their emotional, like, wounded bodies relating to each other, and they think that they're setting boundaries, but what they're actually doing is just they're responding from their emotional body so that they're not being hurt anymore, and it just doesn't actually work.
Yeah, and
so
sometimes
to
in that yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say sometimes in that context, it's not actually a boundary that they're wanting to make, it's a request, and they don't want to get vulnerable with the request. So it's like, I don't want you doing this anymore. But actually, what they're trying to say is, hey, I would love it if, and then put it in the positive. Does that make sense? So it's like,
For
I
sure.
might
So
say, yeah, go.
it sounds like two things you're saying for really healthy boundaries is one, vulnerability, and two, like, deep emotional awareness of where the, like, body is vibrating at.
Yeah, because people just put up with shit and they're tolerating and they're not saying anything and not having boundaries. Like, I get this with my daughter. I'll, like, kind of let her get away with a few times speaking disrespectfully to me when really I should be like, no, or I won't allow you to talk to me like that, or just walking away or giving her silence. You know, silence is actually a really strong boundary. But instead, I'm kind of like sucking it up, and then I just like blow up. And people without boundaries, they'll often have a lot of resentment and frustration that will eventually blow up and project out onto people. And that's because at the time when a boundary needs to be set, they're not listening to their emotional body. So, like, you might say something to me that you might be talking about something, and I'm thinking to myself, shut the fuck up, right? That never happens with you, dear, of course. It really doesn't. But just say it does, or someone is like nagging, or, you know, you're listening to a conversation and it's just, you're tolerating and you're getting frustrated and you're just like, instead of listening to your body and going, you know, actually, I'm tolerating this right now. I'm not in my ease. This is not where I want to be. And then you can say, hey, I really don't want to talk about this anymore. And that's a boundary, right? And you're speaking in the eye, and it's not dependent on anyone else. And then the other person can go, oh, well, and get their knickers in a knot. And you can be not responsible for that and just saying, hey, I'm just expressing my truth. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, and I love that sharing. And before I go into it, I just want to say, if you're listening to this and you're having challenges with your own boundaries and you're wanting some more clarity, write a comment, write some feedback. We'd love to get some response from you about where are you journeying within boundaries in your own life. And back to what you're saying, it's like when those boundaries are crossed, I know for a long time for myself, like, I can come really strong with my sword and be like, get the fuck away from me, I need space. But then, so it's almost like there's two sides of boundaries. Because one of the things I've been really journeying with a lot more is how can I give, like, healthy feedback and boundaries more from my feminine. Like, my masculine knows how to hold a tight container, really form. He says, get the fuck out of the way if you're not going to be with me, like, knows how to be there. But, like, I'm leaning into more of the space of, like, really giving feedback and what does, like, my woman need inside around boundaries and around, like, what does she actually need in terms of communication and all that. And it's like, for me, it's deepened into the space and it's given me more relatability at times when I was a bit more of the overpowering masculine inside of relations and wasn't really feeling the places where I was overpowering someone emotionally. So like attuning to where she is inside lets me feel those times, because I feel like in relating, like you can ask someone to do something and your request is quite genuine, but you also are very much aware and alive to how they're feeling at the same time. So it's this dance between like, I don't want to completely negate to what I'm intuitively feeling about them, but I also want to give them the dignity of their process. So it's just like dance. It's this balancing point and wanting people to be completely free, but also really like, well, I know if I do this or say this, it's going to have an impact. But this is really where I feel like the boundaries takes more of an evolutionary space that's like, I know exactly what I need as a being to show up in love every day. And if somebody is doing something that's inhibiting me from doing that, there's not really anybody that can do that. That's the thing. Like I can just show up and be completely free as me. That doesn't mean I'm going to overstep people's like energetic boundaries. So the place I'm speaking of is like, yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Or if you are, that's not the point. It's like if everybody is just free to be themselves, right?
Yep.
And then there's these imaginary lines that where you know what your boundaries are, and it's like, okay, here's my limits as to how much I'm going to allow people to be close to me, physically, emotionally, whatever. If you're aware of that, if you're aware of kind of spatially how close people can come, and then you know within yourself when it goes over your limits, either energetically, spiritually again, or emotionally, then it's up to you to take care of yourself. So I feel like boundaries can sometimes become about other people creating safety for you, but it's not about that. It's about what do I need to make myself feel safe right now. And there is that place of the masculine's holding the container of awareness and going and witnessing, you know, without judgment and without blaming the other person and not taking it personally. And then the feminine is feeling whatever she's feeling. And then it's like the soul beyond that duality is just tuning in and going, hey, without any story, without any of the fucking over communication that goes on, no, or I don't want to talk about this anymore, or I need some space, or, you know, I'm feeling right now like I really need to jump in the ocean, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be a drama, but it becomes a drama because we over-explain to caretake, we make someone else responsible for our boundaries, and we don't know how to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the safety and caretaking is so strong. Like that insistent need inside of the being to like caretake for someone else because we feel like we're too much. And I think that's like this very underlying theme inside of it all of like, I'm too much, so I have to make sure that because I'm too much, I need to caretake everyone else around me so I can console them and make them feel comfortable. And that's where it's just like, yeah, the safety piece as well. Like I see this so much where people are like, oh, the container wasn't safe enough and I didn't feel safety. It's like there's absolutely nobody in the world who's going to make you have to feel intrinsically safe from inside. Now, it doesn't mean that like I get people go through trauma and there's things that are happening and we've had certain experiences we've happened in life. But when I've really got that space of like, I can't rely upon anyone to really create safety for me if I'm not creating safety for myself. And then with that, I can lean into places where are a little bit uncomfortable. Like a lot in my travels, even far before I was teaching, like I would just ask myself, where can I take myself to get more uncomfortable? Like where is my edge of uncomfortability? And I would continue to find that edge and finding my safe container inside of that. So I didn't feel like I was superimposing my boundaries on anyone. I was just a held vessel moving about in the world, meeting people and just saying, hey, this is me. You know, can we lean in and find a space of love that's present? And it's that leaning in where it's like one boundary field meeting another boundary field saying, wow, okay, this kind of works. Or wow, this feels too intense. I need to take a step back. And then it's the honoring. Like that's the thing I see happen is when one person takes a step back, the other one's like, oh my God, I did something wrong. Oh my God, no, no, please don't leave. And it's like, no, just okay. Like, thank you for taking care of yourself. Beautiful. Like, and I, when that level of communication, that's one of the things I love in the dance that we're having together, baby. Like, I love the way, like, when things arise, like, there's just this, like, it's not even like, it's a conscious attunement that's like, well, she's in her field. Like, if she needs something, she's going to ask or take control and just take responsibility for her actions. And you feel the same thing to me. And it's like this sense of, okay, she's having her emotional process. If she needs something, she's going to reach out. And that doesn't mean inside of that I'm not like aware, and I might say something, hey, do you need some more love? Or at times when you've reached out to me and said, hey, do you just need to be held? Like, is there anything your woman needs? And like, that's a space, it's like, because I feel like what happens with boundaries sometimes is people are like, these are my boundaries and I'm going to stick to it. And it's like, they almost become too rigid. So I find...
So this is, that's the thing. It's like, we've talked a lot about the caretaker, and the other side of it is excessive boundaries. And in the middle of that is healthy boundaries. But it's like, if you haven't been attuned to as a child, if your parents didn't attune to your emotional needs, or if you didn't have role models who asserted healthy boundaries, we don't know what healthy boundaries are, right? And we don't know how to tune in. So if we've been overly dominated, or our emotional bodies haven't been regarded, or our emotional needs haven't been met, then what happens is we get scared later on in life of pleasing, because we need to please. We're scared of being hurt because we're not pleasing, or we're scared of letting people in because we might be hurt. So there's all this fear. And in both cases, boundaries are either not being set because of the fear of losing love, or being set so strongly because of the fear of losing love. It's like, I'm not going to let you in. I'm not going to let you anywhere near me. I'm going to keep you here because you might hurt me. So it's like, people with really rigid boundaries, they tend to say no to everything. And, they withdraw and take a lot of space, and it's very difficult. They don't like to share a lot of personal information, and it's difficult to get close to them. Whereas people with weak boundaries are at the other end of the spectrum. It's like, here I am, I'm open for everybody, like, take me, use me, whatever. And then in the middle of that is healthy boundaries, where we're adults and we know our limitations. We know we're not responsible for other people's emotional bodies. We can say no as a complete sentence. We don't have a problem with walking away from situations, or ignoring someone, or hanging up the phone, when we've had enough. And then having a level of detachment, non-attachment to the outcome, and not disconnection, staying in connection, keeping the heart open. And that's really the difference. If you're setting healthy boundaries, your heart is open when you're setting them. It's not coming from a place of fear and contraction. It's just like this open-hearted place of, I love myself so much right now, and I care about myself so much right now, that I need to do whatever my body wants me to do, which is, to stop in some shape or form. And I love you enough to actually realize that that's the best thing for you, if you're going to get to know me, and if I'm going to open to really, sharing this space of knowing that whatever I need is essentially what you need, even if that's not what you want. Does that all make sense?
For sure. And I really want to drive home that point of, when you're setting healthy boundaries, it's not from a space of reaction. It's a space of like a deep heart-centered connection. And, it brings up to a memory of myself of, like, an interaction I had with my mother a few years ago, who I love deeply. We have a really beautiful relationship, and she was reaching out asking for something. And like, a big part of me wanted to be supportive, but I just, in my heart, I knew, like, I knew I felt a no, and to communicate that to the woman who brought me into this earth. And it was just like, it was really challenging, but it was coming from my heart. And when I met her at that heart, not from a reaction space, she received it, and she was like, okay, like, I get it. I'm with you. Like, fair enough. Like, I understand. Like, I love you. And it was such like that. Like, I have that memory in my brain of, it didn't, neither one of us pulled our love away from one another. It was just like, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where you're at. We're going to love each other where we are and not condemn or push down each other because, one person's asking something from the other. And it was like it brought a lot of warmth that she could receive that and still continue to stay in loving communication and connection. So,
yeah, and I mean, something that we haven't even said yet is, what exactly are boundaries? And there's lots of different definitions, and I would say boundaries are the limits that we place to show people how we want to be treated. And it's like people without good boundaries end up attracting people who push their boundaries and then just keep pushing them further and further. And really, they're a teacher in disguise saying, how much are you going to take before you learn boundaries, right? And so it's really good to go, okay, so what are those energetic lines and how are they defined? For me, it's like anything that's not love is not permitted here. And I'm really clear now. I will not tolerate abuse. I will not tolerate negating. I will not tolerate someone blah, blah, blahing and projecting onto me. And I'm not interested in people's stories. So I have quite strong boundaries now around what I will and won't accept in terms of energetic, sexual and physical communication. And it's like sexually, for women especially, it's easy to just keep tolerating touch that we're not enjoying or being penetrated too soon. And it's like where a lot of women just go into freeze because they think it's their duty, or they've gotten so used to tolerating, or they don't want to lose love, that thing again. But what would it feel like to know that if you're not okay, it's not fucking okay? If it doesn't feel good in your body, I'm all for pushing edges. I'm all for being with your pain. But in terms of your energy being imposed on in a way that does not feel comfortable, that does not feel in your ease, you have a right to say stop. It's your birthright. And the more used to you are at feeling uncomfortable and tolerating, so if you go back to your childhood and look at how much you were neglected or how much abuse was just going on around you or how much shit and chaos was there, and there was quite a bit for me growing up. It's like I'm used to that, so I learned to tolerate that. And then one day I went, actually, I don't have to tolerate that. This is bullshit. I deserve to be spoken to with love and respect. I deserve to be spoken to after someone's had their process and can talk to me clearly, with some flexibility. But I'm very clear now, and I feel like because I'm more clear, I'm teaching people more about how they can communicate responsibly, and I'm teaching people how to treat me and what I am I'm willing and not willing to accept. And I'm pretty much only willing to accept love, I'm not interested in anything much else these days. It only took me
well,
to
that's
40 to
good,
get
honey.
there, but I'm like, if it's not love, you can take. I'm not. It's not about you. It's about me, and I've got enough loving beings and loving environments around me that's what I choose. And that doesn't mean that shit doesn't come up. I'm not saying like in a love and light way. I'm saying it in a way that actually when love is present, anything that's not love still comes up to be touched and healed. It just doesn't have to be through conflict and imposition and having your boundaries crossed.
So you're saying there's a way for more grace. Is that what you're saying, darling?
That's what I'm saying.
Beautiful. So if you're listening to this and you're wanting more grace, then it's possible. It's possible to find more grace when love is actually present. You can hold that at the core of your being, stand true to who you actually are, and it's practice. This is the beauty of relating, is learning to find out who you actually are in the space of relating. That's one of the things I love, and loving you, sweetheart, and loving this connection that we have, and loving like sharing and talking about boundaries and talking about all this, and really like staying in our own integrity of who we are as individuals without trying to like prove our worth or like validate our need to be loved. It's like two loving beings meeting and celebrating and stumbling and falling and continuing to love and more, and like finding grace through it all is where like I want more than anything right now. And definitely here in India for the week, needing a lot of grace and grace and grace.
I bet. So one thing I want to say before we close. Are you wrapping it up? Is that what you were
Yeah,
doing?
yeah, roughing it up. Yeah. But go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so one thing that I want to say before you wrap it up, if that's where you're going, because I'm bursting to say this, is that I feel like in a field where there's a lot of activation happening in an environment where, you know, we're teaching Tantra, which is what we do, that boundaries are a really important thing to establish. And I feel like, yeah, it's great to get people to a place where they're trusting themselves, but unfortunately, we haven't been taught that. And to create a safe container in my workshops and retreats, in our workshops and retreats, boundaries is one of the first things we talk about. So at the Living Tantra retreat, we start with the base chakra, and we really go into what is it that you need to feel safe and how can you be responsible for that. And we can tell you and give you concepts, but the embodiment practices that actually begin to give your nervous system different imprints of what it's like to have your boundaries respected, different embodiment practices where you can actually test out your boundaries with people and explore and experiment is a way to be reparented in a way so that your needs are attuned to, so that you can feel where you begin and someone else ends, or where you end and someone else begins. And it's a really important part of this work. So I kind of pride myself on the container that Alaya gives in our retreats and workshops, because boundaries are really important. And for me personally, I like to stay attuned to all of my participants and feel into those people who have had intense environments of abuse or neglect, and put that extra time in to help them to feel their boundaries, but also give them enough space to become sovereign and autonomous in that. So I feel that's really important.
Yeah, and I love that you share that because that often can be overlooked, and that's one of the things I love in sharing and holding space and teaching with you, holding space, whatever that means, but really like creating a container for people to feel safe so that they can let go of the things that don't work so they can find the chords of love that are true and present within them. And yeah, on that note, there's quite a few workshops and retreats and offerings that are coming up. We'll put some information below. I know there's the Art of Loving Women coming up in Perth, just not this weekend, but the next. And then Living Tantra happening in Bali, which is an 8-day journey. I'm super excited to teach with you going through and really celebrating life, but also learning about what does Tantra mean inside of your own individual body. So the information will be below, both of us doing
And
workshops
also
and sessions and
awakened
everything else.
relationships.
So, yep,
Awakened
yep.
Relationships in Melbourne, where we'll be going, where couples will have a chance to go into boundaries, or if you're single, you'll have a chance to experiment with someone, which is super important. And the Art of Loving Women in Perth, and how to really tune into a woman's emotional body and not only honor the boundaries that she's confident enough to express, but to attune to her and feel them energetically. Because it's really difficult for some women to know their boundaries. And, you know, for me, I've had to have teachers in that. So it's who have taught in different ways.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a beautiful playground.
Beautiful. Well, I'm looking forward to playing in the playground and supporting those beings that are coming forth to learn and to remember who they
Mm-hmm.
actually are. So I love you. Thank you for doing this live. It's always a joy. Mwah. I'll see you soon, darling.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.